The most dangerous wars are the ones everyone is trying to avoid. Right now, the United States Navy is reshaping itself, not for speeches about peace, not for dramatic shows of force, and not for triumphant victory parades, but for survival. In a world where a single mistake at sea could trigger consequences no one can fully control, there are no countdown clocks, no emergency broadcasts, and no official declarations warning of an approaching conflict. The transformation underway is quiet, technical, and deliberate. Yet taken together, these changes point to a reality that is impossible to ignore. The U.S. Navy is preparing for a war it hopes will never happen. For much of the post-Cold War era, American naval power rested on a simple and powerful assumption: control. Control of global sea lanes that carry trade and energy. Control of the airspace above those waters. Control of escalation itself. Aircraft carriers became the ultimate symbol of this control. When a carrier strike group arrived, it sent an unmistakable message without firing a single shot. Allies felt reassured. Potential adversaries recalculated their options. Crises were often managed not through combat, but through presence. This sense of certainty shaped how the Navy was built, trained, and deployed. Large surface fleets operated with confidence, supported by secure communications, global logistics, and an expectation of technological superiority. The oceans felt open, predictable, and manageable. For decades, American naval dominance was not just a matter of firepower, but of psychological advantage. The belief that the U.S. Navy would prevail was often enough to prevent challenges from becoming conflicts. That belief is no longer as solid as it once was. Modern naval warfare is evolving rapidly, and the changes favor speed, precision, and information rather than sheer size. Long-range anti-ship missiles have become more accurate and more widely available. Submarines are quieter and more capable, able to operate undetected in areas once considered secure. Satellites, drones, and networked sensors have made the oceans far more transparent. What was once hidden is now observed, tracked, and analyzed in near real time. In this environment, large and visible platforms face new risks. Distance no longer guarantees safety. Concentration of power can attract attention rather than deter it. The very attributes that once defined strength can now create vulnerability. The U.S. Navy is acutely aware of this shift, even if it rarely frames it in dramatic or public terms. Internal strategy documents, operational concepts, and training exercises all reflect a sobering conclusion. Future conflicts at sea will be contested from the start. Communications may be disrupted, sensors may be degraded, information may be incomplete or misleading. The assumption of uncontested access can no longer be relied upon. This realization has driven a quiet but profound change in how the Navy prepares. Instead of focusing solely on overwhelming dominance, it is prioritizing resilience. Instead of building plans around perfect conditions, it is training for disruption and uncertainty. Instead of seeking decisive battles, it is emphasizing deterrence and denial. Preparation in this context does not mean rushing toward confrontation. In fact, the opposite is true. Highly visible military preparations can raise tensions and increase the risk of miscalculation. Quiet preparation, by contrast, strengthens deterrence without forcing escalation. It signals capability without provocation and readiness without intent. At the heart of this approach is a redefinition of success. In earlier eras, victory at sea often meant defeating an opposing fleet in battle and gaining uncontested control. Today, success may mean preventing an adversary from achieving their objectives at all. Denying access to critical areas, complicating planning, and raising the costs of aggression can be enough to stop a conflict before it begins. A war that promises no quick or decisive outcome is far less attractive to start. This shift is reflected in how the Navy structures its forces. Rather than concentrating power in a small number of massive platforms, capability is being distributed across a wider range of systems. Smaller surface combatants, submarines, long-range strike assets, and unmanned platforms are being integrated into a more flexible and adaptive network. This makes the fleet harder to target, harder to disrupt, and harder to neutralize. Distribution does not mean weakness, it means complexity. An adversary facing a dispersed and mobile force must account for multiple threats from multiple directions, often without knowing where those threats are coming from. Uncertainty becomes a form of deterrence in its own right. Aircraft carriers remain central to American naval power, but their role is evolving. they are still unmatched in their ability to project air power and coordinate operations across vast distances. However, advances in missile technology and surveillance have changed how carriers are employed. Operating close to hostile shores now carries greater risk than in the past. As a result, carriers are increasingly expected to operate from greater distances, relying on longer-range aircraft and integration with submarines, land-based forces, and allied capabilities. Rather than being the spearhead of every operation, carriers are becoming command nodes and deterrence platforms, shaping the battle space without necessarily entering it directly. This evolution reflects realism, not decline. It acknowledges that survival and influence matter more than proximity. Beneath the surface, submarines are playing an even more critical role. In many ways, they embody the qualities the modern Navy values most. Stealth allows them to operate without provoking immediate responses. Persistence enables them to remain in key areas for extended periods. Ambiguity complicates an adversary's calculations and planning. A submarine does not need to be seen to have an effect. The possibility of its presence alone can shape behavior. Submarines offer leaders options that surface forces often cannot. They can gather intelligence, threaten high-value targets, and deny access to strategic areas without creating public flashpoints. In a strategic environment where every visible move is scrutinized and interpreted, this quiet influence is invaluable. Yet even the most advanced platforms cannot guarantee success on their own. The Navy recognizes that future conflicts will be fought as much in the information domain as on the water. Communications networks, data links, and command systems will be primary targets. Disruption, deception, and cyber attacks will be constant threats. As a result, survivability has become the guiding principle behind many recent changes. Networks are being hardened. Command structures are being decentralized. Units are being trained to operate independently if cut off from higher headquarters. Decision-making authority is being pushed downward to allow faster responses in uncertain conditions. These changes reflect an understanding that waiting for perfect information may not be possible in a real conflict. Training has therefore taken on new importance. Exercises increasingly simulate degraded environments rather than ideal ones. Sailors are expected to operate with incomplete data, unreliable communications, and constant pressure. The focus is not on flawless execution, but on adaptability and endurance. The Navy is preparing for prolonged competition rather than short, decisive engagements. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of this transformation is what it seeks to achieve. Not a dramatic battle, not a historic confrontation, but nothing at all. If the U.S. Navy succeeds, there may be no single moment that defines its efforts, no decisive engagement to analyze, no clear turning point to commemorate. Instead, there would be long periods of tension where potential conflicts never cross the line into open war because the risks are too high and the outcomes too uncertain. This is the paradox of modern deterrence. The better prepared a force is for war, the less likely it is to fight one. Strength, when combined with restraint, can stabilize rather than inflame. The Navy's quiet preparations are not driven by a desire for conflict, but by an understanding of how fragile stability can be in a contested world. In the end, the U.S. Navy is preparing for uncertainty. It is acknowledging that the oceans are no longer uncontested, that control can no longer be assumed, and that miscalculation could have consequences far beyond the battlefield. By adapting quietly and deliberately, it aims to ensure that future wars remain hypothetical rather than real. The war the U.S. Navy is preparing for is not one it wants to fight. It is the war it hopes never happens at all.